So we find ourselves in that depressingly slow post-New Year January slump where every day just feels like a chore. But I guess on the plus side, every day is a day closer to spring. The not so good side of that is that every day is a reminder that I didn't manage to do quite as much perch fishing as I'd hoped over the last few months. So I set out to a local water to see if I couldn't go some way to putting that right. And as usual, I was baiting for the silverfish to attract in the perch. I was using a mixture of mashed bread, just covered in a bit of ground bait to help bind it together, and then throwing it along the front of some overhanging rhododendrons. I'm still using the float ledger, not because I particularly need to at this venue, just the fact that it was on this rod. So why waste time fiddling around retying things if you don't have to? But although I hadn't wasted time with a rig, I maybe hadn't taken quite enough time with the bread mash because it was popping back to the surface and drifting off down the pond, which wasn't the end of the world because there's nothing in here that would be taking it off the surface. It was a little bit frustrating because I was slightly limited, and although I say there was nothing that should be taking it off the surface, I could hear these slurping sounds as the bread went out of eyeshot, and I thought I'd go and have a little investigate, and sure enough there was a carp protected by a load of snag trees, just going around mopping up the crust, which is interesting because to the best of my knowledge there's not any carp in this particular pond. Clearly I was wrong, or someone was wrong, and not only was there one, there was in fact another one underneath him, a bigger looking fish, but the second fish wasn't interested in taking bait off the surface. But the more I watched, the more I saw, and they were coming out of the snag tree and doing a lap of the shallows. This is very much up in the shallow end, and any bits of bread that had sunk to the bottom as they drifted their way up to this end, so the bigger mirror carp was taking. And I don't need any sort of second invitation to jump in. I'm never going to look a gift horse in the mouth, so I went back to my swim, cut the float rig off, tied a hook on the line, and crept up into an old swim. And there is actually an old swim in this corner where I am, but it's fallen into disrepair because of the tree that's in the water, and for one reason or another it's never been cleaned out. I don't know whether that's an access issue or whether it's been left in there to offer some sort of protection with the cormorants, but clearly it was shielding a couple of carp. And I spent probably a good 20 minutes, half an hour just trying to get an idea for how these carp were going round the shallows, because whenever you're doing any sort of fishing like this, it's not just a case of being able to present a bait and hook a fish. It's a large part of it is how you're going to land that fish. So I needed to come up with a plan and map out their route so I could intercept one of them at the appropriate point that would give me the best chance. And once I was comfortable with what they were doing, I took one of the last bits of bread I had and moulded it around the hook, and I took quite a big bit of bread for a few reasons. Firstly, with no other weight on the line, it had to provide casting weight, and secondly, although it's quite shallow up in this end, the ripple was making it difficult to see the bottom, so I wanted a big bait so I could actually physically see it and keep an eye on it. And thirdly, of course, I wanted it to be big enough for the carp to see. And I cast it out, and seeing these carp in here reminded me of something that took place many years ago when I was a teenager. Myself and some friends, we joined a local club, and then upon joining this club we were presented with a club handbook that listed all the waters and the species that they contained and the size of those fish, and we took it as absolute gospel. And there was one occasion where we traipsed across a load of fields and halfway through a wood to fish a secluded little pond that, according to the club handbook, only held tench crucians and some silvers. And being teenagers, we gave it our best shot for about 20 minutes, half an hour before we got bored and went exploring. And we worked our way around the pond, and it had a shallow end much the same as this one. And as we came round to it, I could see these big branches in the water, or sunk on the bottom of the shallows. And I turned to my friend and I said, wouldn't that be incredible if they were fish? And as we turned back, one of them swam away, and they were in fact carp. To our eyes they were huge. I mean, they probably weren't, they were just big singles I would imagine, but they were monstrous fish. And we learnt a lesson there, that don't always believe everything you read. And by this point the fish had come back out of the snags and they were coming around in front of me, and the bigger one was at the front. And that was, if it was only going to have one chance, that was the one that I wanted. And I'll let you enjoy this fight in its entirety. Under 20 seconds. But that's not unusual. With unpressured or uncorked carp, they tend to react one of two ways. They either go absolutely ballistic, or they do what this one did and just sit there with their fins out and wait for you to scoop them up with the net. And to be honest, I was very glad that it didn't pull at all, and decided to give up, because the proximity of the snags meant that I would have had quite a battle on my hands. And as a perch angler, I think it's fair to say that I'm not too bad at catching carp when I should be catching perch. It was a very nice fish and a very nice surprise. I didn't weigh it, I didn't have my scales. It was probably very close to 2.0. And with that out of the way and safely returned, it was time to get back to the serious business of trying to catch a big perch. Now, some of you may be familiar with a viewer of this channel whose name is Martin. He comments under the name Felgate, and he's very kindly sent me a selection of his homemade floats to try out. And as I had to re-tackle, this seemed like the perfect opportunity to give a run out to this one. And then at the business end, just a swan shot and a prawn on the hook. It's not very deep, this swim, and I thought that the perch would be just hiding underneath these rhododendrons here. It looked perfect to me. So just cast out and then slowly draw the float back. And as I say, Felgate has sent me these floats, and as well as using traditional materials such as cane and cork, as with this float, he also uses quite an eclectic mix of materials, including pen bodies, bits of old floorboard, rivets. So it's almost a steampunk of the float making world. And I look forward to trying them over the course of the remaining season and indeed into the next. So I'm sure they will feature in more than just this video. But the perch fishing was very slow, and I don't know why. I was getting frustrated because, as I say, I'm counting the days now. And almost in desperation, I upped sticks and went down to the bottom pond. And this in many ways is the other way round. The top pond should produce, but it's full of perch. If you go up there in the summer with a maggot on a size 16, you will catch 2 and 3 inch perch, fish after fish after fish after fish, but I can't find the bigger ones. And there's not supposed to be carp in there, and I caught a carp. This lower pond has got carp in it, and it's probably where the one originated from. But it also supposedly has big perch in it, and I can't find them or see them. And because of the carp population, I'd sort of pulled back on the ground bait slightly. There is an awful lot of silvers in here as well though, so I wasn't getting too carried away. As I know from experience, the carp down in this pond do fight hard. But it was a bit of a guessing game for me. But once in a while you guess somewhere near right. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. And it's amusing to me that this fish, whilst probably absolutely a fraction the size of the carp that I caught first, took longer to land. And rather wonderfully, it was a perch. Not the biggest perch, and again not one to be worth troubling the scales with, but a very chunky little fish. And I actually think it's more impressive to get a perch out of the bottom pond than it is out of the top. But full of enthusiasm and vigour, I made my way back up to the top pond, came away from the rhododendrons which are up to the left and out into the main bowl, because I had nothing to go on other than not catching perch, that is. And I am determined to get a good perch from here. And I waited, and then the rain came. And I waited, and I carried on waiting, and then the pheasants started to roost. And at that point I thought, I've done all I need to do today. I've caught what I shouldn't, not caught what I should have done. Try again next time.